All right, welcome everybody around the world, and welcome to all my subscribers. So for this video here, I know I always say it, but I don't want this video to be a long video, so I'm going to try and keep it short and summarized. To help this process, to save me waffling, I have my two books here, so if I want to, I can open them up and just read from them. But basically, what I want to do with this message here is to raise awareness that the Bible, that God through the Bible has revealed the time period in which the end of days and everything that comes with it will arrive. And this is not based on conjecture. It's based upon very explicit verses from the book of Daniel. And it's also supplemented by a host of other scriptural finds of my own and some others. But most importantly, God explicitly told us in the book of Daniel, he gave us, he described the time as the end. He repeated that. He's definitely talking about the end of days. And he told us the length of time that would transpire until that end of days. He told us the number for the length of that time. And he also gave us an instruction to basically count those days. So it's very, very clear. And he even told us the event to take the measure from. So it's all there clearly and explicitly in the book of Daniel. And it either will happen and prove it all to be true, or it won't happen. But according to what God has said in Daniel and in all the other places in the Bible, which is what I cover in this book here, 7 pillars of scriptural proof. So there's 7 different prophecies. Each of the 7 different prophecies contain different numbers that God has given us in the Bible, okay? Numbers for time periods, as in length of years. And all of these together collectively show, as the title shows, 2023 and 2024 are this time period. Now, 2023 is now drawing to an end. I've been talking about this time period for about 7 years now on YouTube. But now 2023 is drawing to an end. So obviously, unless it happens tonight or tomorrow, it's going to be happening in 2024. So as we approach 2024 now, we're about a day away, depending where you live in the world. We all have to truly, truly appreciate, and I think it would be a crime. I don't know if it's a sin, but it would be a travesty. That's the best word. If people, not just Christians, I mean, a lot of people might come to faith if they heard these things and heard the evidences that I detail in this book. Also, a lot of people would come to the faith, undoubtedly, millions would come to the faith if they read my systematic theology of the original and true Christianity. Because the original and true Christianity is far more biblical and sensible. And a lot of the problems, and welcome, a lot of the problems that people have with Christianity that keeps them away from Christianity, a lot of these problems don't even exist in the original doctrine. So it's very, very important that these messages get out here. Because the theology of God and of Jesus is very, very important. But the end is also important. Both things are very, very important. So of all the books I could write, the 2 most important things, the end and the theology, they are both very important, equally important. And it's critical now that we're approaching 2024 that people understand these things. It's not conjecture. God is very, very clear when the end will happen. He's abundantly clear. And even if the only, out of the 7 pillars of scriptural proof that I have in my book there, even if we only had one, which is one of the prophecies of Daniel, this alone is epic, monumental, groundbreaking evidence for when it's going to occur. But we have all the other evidence, such as, which I detail in chapter 1 here, and I might even read through some of this tonight to help show the evidence. But in chapter 1 there, I show, and it's all there on the pages, no denying it, the chronology, the chronological path of years, every verse, every number, biblically supplied, all the verses quoted right there on the pages. Okay, so and all the math is broken down in sub steps for everybody on the pages, right, as you go. And anybody can see. It only requires a brain and 2 eyes that, according to what has been told to us in the Bible and combined with obvious recent history. I mean, we all know that it's the year 2023. There's been 2023 years, obviously, since BC to 80. And the Babylonian invasion took place, whatever it was, 587, 586. I've got the actual date in the book. My point is, all the numbers are right there. They're undeniable, and they total to 6,000. It's taken from the birth of Seth, who was the first son of man born of a woman. He was the first one, first mortal, and from Seth came the human lineage. As we know, Abel was killed. He couldn't create the human lineage, and Cain was cursed and essentially forsaken, in a sense, whatever the right term would be, and exiled, right? So the lineage came from Seth. Adam wasn't born son of a woman. He was created as an immortal being of such, who had to eat from the tree of life, but then he was cursed to lose that estate and cursed to be immortal and suffer the woes of mortality. Okay, so Adam and Eve were never born. Okay, and that's important because if you take the measure from Adam's creation, the year 2023 is the year 6,130, as the math show. But Seth was born when Adam was 130. And this shows that the total thus from Seth is 6,000 years. So this will be 6 days in which mortal man would toil, okay, by the sweat of his brow, as God pronounced in the curse in Eden. So this will be the utter fulfillment of everything. And the seventh day will be the millennia of rest and peace for the world, where it's reformed and everything, and made into a new earth. So that's the pattern, and I show that in chapter 1 there. So, I mean, let's go through that very quickly. I mean, some of these other chapters are quite complex. I wouldn't go through them in this video, but this one here is pretty straightforward. It's just basic arithmetic. I don't have to read the entire chapter, but I can do a quick breakdown for everybody, right? So, for example, here, these are all the patriarchs and the source verses where you can see it yourself. Okay, here's an example of the stepped breakdowns of the maths. Okay, so break it down as you go. It would take some time to read this all out, and I don't really want to misquote things. So maybe I'll just refer to the fact that I have it in the book and keep things simple for this video. When it gets to the list of the kings who ruled, I've got all that here as well, and how many years they ruled for, because that's all part of the overall number. So everything is meticulously here. I mean, every single, and this is the final step of the maths, right? So every single year is meticulously, literally laid out and accounted for in the Bible. Whether you're taking it from the creation of Adam or the birth of Seth, doesn't make a difference. It is all accounted for all the way up to the Babylonian invasion. It even documents and ascribes time periods to time after that. The point is, it is the chronological timeline is right there, year for year, not a missing single digit, all the way up from Adam to the destruction in 587 or 586, whichever year it was. I always get it mixed up, but it's in the book documented. So all that's documented. And then from there, we have all known documented recorded history, right? So the Babylonian invasion is a well-documented historical event. Historians, archaeology, everything has confirmed the date for us, right? So from that point until now, the maths all agree it's 6,000. So it is the final year. But we don't know if God uses Gregorian calendar or Hebrew calendar. So that might be one single reason why no man can know the day or hour. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because, like the title of my book shows, it's going to be 2023 or 2024. It's going to be roughly in this time period based on everything God has told us in the prophecy of Daniel and in the other pillars of scriptural prophecy that I've discovered in the Bible. So it's quite undeniable. I mean, mathematically, using theological logic, okay, using theology, we can see that it would make perfect sense that we would have 6 days for man to work in as a mortal, and then at the end of it would be the end of days, the judgment, the rapture. The mortals who are worthy are transfigured and transformed and translated, whatever the word is you want to use, and we're no longer mortals, and those who are in trouble, leave the world and go to a place of punishment. That's where everything gets judged and moves on to where it needs to go, and then the earth is left barren, and it's reformed and made anew, right? And that is the 1,000-year period of rest, which will be the seventh day of rest. So a day with God is like 1,000 years. That's the theology, the logic of the theology there, and it makes perfect fluid sense. Christians and Jews have thought this themselves for thousands of years anyways, that it works like this. God's divine week of 7,000 years. And also symbolically in Israel, in the Jewish law, in the law to Moses, you have that the child is circumcised on the 8th day. So that would be after the seventh day, which is of rest, is over. It means on the 8th is when it's circumcised. So if you think about it, just making sure the cat and the dog are safe. If you think about it, the symbolism makes perfect sense here. You work for 6 in toil, you rest for 1 day, everything's refreshed, right? It depends where you're going, right? But everything's refreshed. And on the 8th, you start over again. It's a new cycle, right? And that's symbolized by the circumcision, because circumcision is symbolized by a shedding of the old and the unwanted and keeping of what is required, right? So it's like starting anew. And, like that separation is finalized. So the symbolism fits and the maths fit. It's undeniable. Like I said, it's all there in the book. It's all there in the Bible. It's undeniable. It would be this one point alone, out of the 7 pillars of proof, this one pillar, this one piece of proof alone is quite astounding in terms of like odds. Like, what are the odds that we have this theological framework anyways? Nobody else has made that discovery besides myself. Nobody else out there has thought about taking it from Seth. Nobody. I've tried to find others who have thought likewise. Nobody has. So that just furthers my point, right? That shows that it's something important to be discovered. And everybody else has been oblivious to this. What are the odds, therefore? Okay, so it's not just some abundant conjecture that people float around. This is like finding a little golden nugget that's very, very real and very, very precise. And what are the odds that it fits with theology in the 6th and the 7th pattern, and that 2023 is the 6,000th year? That within itself is quite impressive, but it's insignificant when you compare it to how impressive it is in conjunction with Daniel's prophecy, right? So just 2 pillars alone. So the 1 pillar by itself, the 6,000 years, is pretty impressive evidence, right? And be a pretty uncanny coincidence. And when you combine that with the fact that 2023, 2024 is the exact period which Daniel's prophecy pinpoints meticulously, which is verified by all the other major epic historical events that confirmed all of this, right? So it's definitely concreted in and legit. It cannot be a coincidence that the same time period that God says would be the end in the prophecy of Daniel is the same time period that marks the end of 6,000 years. Okay? God, the framework of 6 days working is laid out in Genesis, the Edenic story, the creation story, right? Adam was cursed to become immortal. If you read what the curse was to Adam, it was for him, for mortals, to work by the sweat of their brow and to work. And God's law from day one is you work for 6 days, okay, and then you rest on the 7th. God himself kept this template himself in the creation, in the Edenic creation order. He worked for 6 days, and on the 7th, God himself rested. So he set forth that precedent, that template from the first moments, right? From the start. When he gave the law to Moses, this was repeated. Even before he gave the law to Moses, it was repeated with the manna, with the quail, and if I'm not mistaken, with other stories in between then. So it's quite undeniable, and it cannot be a coincidence. Like, if you want to say, oh no, skeptically, maybe it is just a big coincidence, then the numbers, the odds for that would be pretty high. They'd be pretty astronomical, I would imagine, that you would get the exact year period at the end of 6,000 years. That is not something that could be premeditated and calculated by fraudulent authors of biblical books. Like, nobody could pre-plan this. That would be pretty much impossible. you'd probably require software to pull that one off. And you couldn't do that in ancient times, and especially across the centuries when the different books were written by different people at different times. They couldn't compile together like the list, the chronology and all that comes primarily from Genesis. And Second Kings contains a verse that gives a figure for a length of time, like how long it was before the Exodus, or I mean, after the Exodus, for example, right? So it's across multiple books by different authors over a vast period of time. There's no way that they were all conspiring using time machines to fool future peoples, right? When they themselves in the text don't even make it clear that, hey, there's going to be 6,000 years. They don't even connect the dots in the text. This is like a golden nugget that has been discovered, okay? And the golden nugget is very self-evident, very precise, very, very real, confirmed by its own maths, and it's very, very legitimate. And the odds for this randomly occurring would be pretty astronomical. But this is only 2 out of 7 pillars, because when you factor in the 5 other prophecies that are in the Bible that I go through in my book here, okay, and you compile all of them together, by the end of it, I am telling you, right? There is no way that this wasn't a product of design. It would be impossible. Okay? The prophecy of Daniel alone, just one of the 7 pillars of scriptural proof, just that one alone, because it is such a huge prophecy covering about 2,600 years of time. Okay? It's the longest period ever described in the Bible. It covers the longest amount of pages in the Bible. It's the biggest and the longest prophecy covering over a chapter. Okay? And it's the most precise prophecy in the Bible. It details how many kings with this final beast kingdom. It says that after 10, there would be an 11th. And then from the 11th, there would be an abomination built on the Temple Mount. And at that point there, we're taking a measure of 3.5 times, which is 1,260 years. It's very, very precise with all these things, the events and the periods of measure. Okay. And I've said before, if somebody fraudulently wrote this book, whenever it was written in history, okay, whether it was written 500 BC or 100 BC, no matter when it was, it definitely dates to at least a couple hundred years BC on the Dead Sea, based on the Dead Sea Scroll findings, like with, the fragments and the parts between 100 and 300 something BC. That's a fact, right? So it's not more recent than that. My point is, doesn't matter. I mean, whoever wrote it and whenever it was written, the point is, whoever wrote it ended up writing a legitimate prophecy, okay, whether they like it or not. So if it was fraudulent, that just proves its authenticity more, because if it was fraudulent, the odds of a person pulling off a fraud like this across thousands of years, like I said, a 2,600 year period of time the prophecy covers, with key events detailed, time periods in between, it finishes with the end, with all this detailed out, for all these events to take place and transpire, monumental, epic, huge events, it is impossible for someone to just fraudulently get it all right if they're just making it up. Okay? If the fact is that they got it all right, if it was fraudulent, then they got it all right, which means, ironically, that the fraudster was actually working as a prophet, because they gave what is actual prophecy. Okay? There's not a lot of prophecy flying around there, even in the Bible, in the real world. Prophecy is a rare, exclusive, like miraculous type thing, right? So that's what I'm saying. The irony, the impossible irony of a fraudster writing the book of Daniel as a fraudulent work, but yet his fraudulent work ends up actually functioning as a legitimate and quite incredible prophecy that is unparalleled anywhere else, in any religion, anywhere, even within the Bible itself. That alone shows you by logic that it could not be a work of fraud. It had to be written. It is a prophecy, whoever wrote it, and it is a prophecy. So someone inspired by God wrote that, and that prophecy came true in astonishing ways. For example, the final beast kingdom, which was Islam. Okay, beast kingdoms have to conquer Israel. That's what makes them a beast kingdom. They have to oppose God. Okay, amidst the other things, but those are the 2 most important things. Okay, now when Jesus walked the earth, Rome was ruling Israel. Jesus made a remark in the New Testament to John in the book of Revelation that the 10 kings of the beast have not received their kingdom yet. Now, Jesus was born in the time and empire of Rome. Okay? Now, yes, Rome ruled over Israel, and Rome did, in a sense, religiously oppose the God of Judaism. However, they did allow Jews and I think all religions to practice their own religion. It was only later with certain people like Caligula and others who rose up against people's religious liberties and mandated certain crazy things. Up until then, I mean, after all, the Romans built the Jewish temple, the second Jewish temple. That's quite astounding. Okay, so they weren't being religiously oppressive, they built the Jews the second temple. That's quite an astounding thing when you stop and actually think about it. And they gave them their place in society and everything. And they succeeded in their own ways. A lot of them were successful or had money and had power and influence, and they weren't just like outcast citizens, right? They had I'm just saying offhand, a pretty decent time compared to what could have been had or imagined could be had in Rome, right? Rome being slave masters of so many nations, conquering nations, trampling peoples down. But hey, they actually built the second Jewish temple and allowed the Jews to practice and all of that there, depending on what crazy leader was ruling at the time with the Romans, you know what I mean? But generally, that happened. After Rome left, there were about 600 years in which Israel didn't get ruled over by a beast nation. Okay, if you look at history, and I don't think Rome was actually a beast nation. Um, Rome was the tail end of the Grecian religious system, and it's often called the Greco-Roman system, anyways. But anyways, I'm not getting into petty details here or minor arguments, right? But the point is that Rome was the tail end of the Grecian beast kingdom. Okay, the religions were the same. Okay, even the racial background of the people, where they were pretty much in the same place on the same continent and not too far from each other, you know what I mean, on the planet. It's not like they're from a different continent, different nation, different race, different culture, different. It was very, very much exactly the same thing, same architecture, same everything. Okay, and occupying like the same kingdoms and empires and all of that. So, but most importantly, the same religion. Now, the Grecian beast and kingdom fell, right? It started with Alexander, it fell, it got split to the four winds. If you read the chapters of Daniel, this is where he literally identifies that beast kingdom as Grecia, right? And he describes the end and demise of that beast kingdom. If you read that chapter there, it's like chapter 8, 9, or 10 or something, right? When you read that chapter, it openly says that when the Grecian beast falls, its kingdom, its empire is split up to the four winds. And then from that point, it describes like a whole chapter about the end of this kingdom, about this time period here. So Grecia has ended and it went to the four winds. And then it goes on for like a whole chapter. Okay. This is that period of time after Grecia fell. So Grecia fell whenever it was, like 150 or something BC. We all know historically what was in place after that. It was Rome. Was Rome really the next beast kingdom? If Rome was a beast kingdom, then it must be the fourth. However, Rome isn't the fourth for a host of reasons, very important reasons. The evidence is overwhelming, anyways. But to save minor arguments here for this video, my point is that if Rome was a beast kingdom, it would have to be the fourth, because that's the only one that comes after the Grecian beast kingdom. My point is that Rome was the tail end of the Grecian beast kingdom, hence the similarities. Now, Daniel says in three places, and all of this is being appointed by God, like what Daniel is saying. Daniel says in three places that the fourth and final beast kingdom is not like, it is different from, okay, all of the other beast kingdoms and nations. Daniel says that. Now, Rome was just like Greece in so many ways. Architecture, people, religion was the same thing. Okay, even their empire and zones in place in the world was all the same thing. Okay, if you had a Greek and a Roman and you compare them, say, to a Cushite and an Egyptian and a Japanese person in ancient times, who's going to look pretty much the same? You compare Greek architecture and religion and Roman religion and compare that to ancient Japanese, compare that to ancient Cushite, you know what I mean? When Daniel said three times that the fourth final beast is unlike, it is diverse from all the other beast kingdoms, it means that the fourth and final is not Rome. It cannot be Rome. Okay, so Rome was, when the Grecian kingdom fell, split into four. Historically, what came in place at that point was Rome. So that chapter there in Daniel, where he's talking about what happens after it's split into four, that's where Rome's coming into play. And hence, this is the area when it gets into chapter 9, where it talks about the arrival of Jesus, okay, which is during this time of Roman rulership over the land, over the Holy Land, okay? Then Rome overthrew the temple in 70 AD. Okay, but Rome itself, and this is another important thing, Rome fell as a nation around 2 to 400 AD. Okay, let's just say 300 for the sake of it. Rome fell around then. So if Rome as an empire fell around then it cannot be the fourth and final beast kingdom. Okay, it's gone, it's history. And that's why people who believe that Rome have to believe conspiracies about, oh, but Rome never died. It just secretly disguised itself as, and they have all sorts of theories, British Empire, this, that, and the other. And I'm not getting into it because it's all silly. But at the end of the day, like I said, Jesus told us in Revelation that the 10 kings of the final beast kingdom have not yet received their kingdom yet, which means that in the days of Rome, they hadn't got their kingdom yet. So that means Rome wasn't the final beast kingdom. Okay, it was just the tail end of the Grecian kingdom. And that's why when you get to chapter 9, it is these Roman kings who are persecuting Jesus that are being spoken about. Okay, and then after that, when he gets into chapter, it is touched on in chapter 7, right? But in chapter 10, 11, and 12 is where it's all detailing about this very vast final period of time in which the final beast kingdom would rise up. And it actually details, most people skip over these chapters. It's a lot of fluff. They just get to chapter 12 or whatever. But these chapters here is literally where it's talking about Greece has died out. You have the tail end of Greece, which was the Roman kingdom. It talks about those Roman kings opposing Jesus and all of that. And then after that there, and talks about when Jesus dies. And then after that, you have those final chapters, which are about and detail the birth, the creation of this final new religion. And it says in those chapters of Daniel that this religion would be brand new, unheard of. Nobody's practiced it before. That the founder would create a temple to an unknown God that his forefathers didn't worship. This is not true of Romans. Romans always kept the same pantheon for thousands of years. Okay. However, with Islam, it was a brand new religion. The forefathers of their founder had never practiced this religion. It was brand new. And they built a temple to an unknown deity that nobody else had ever heard about in the world. And their religion and their empire was unlike all of the other nations in the world and all the other beast nations. So Daniel was truly fulfilled through that lens, not through the concept of Rome. Okay? And like I said, Rome died anyways in 3 or 400 AD. During the 600-year period after Rome destroyed the temple, a few other nations came in and tried to rule over the land. Some of them kind of did. But at the end of the day, in 639, 640 AD is when Islam came in and conquered. And when Islam came in and conquered, they then sat there and ruled over the land. It was part of their empire. It's a very important land to them in their religion. I gotta let the cat out. And they ruled it for 1260 years until 1948 AD. So all this confirms Daniel's prophecy, right? In Daniel chapter 7, it says there'll be 3.5 times given into the hand of the 11th king. Okay, so it tells us there and in Revelation, okay, that the final beast kingdom would have 10 kings that rise up. But Daniel tells us there would be an 11th who comes up after. Okay, now in Islam, when their founder died, he was the first. When their founder died, it was unexpected and they weren't expecting that. So they scrambled to keep hold of what the start of the empire that they had started. And in order to do this, they created the caliphate system, okay? And they appointed, his cohorts became the first caliphs. Now, there were 10, was it 10? Yes, there were 10 caliphs after the founder, okay? The 10th caliph was the one who built the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, okay? Now, Daniel chapter 7 says that there would be 10 kings and then an 11th. And into his hand is given the measure 3.5 times. So in the Dome of the Rock was built in 688 AD. 3.5 times, which is 1260 years from here, brings you to 1948. Okay, let me let the cat out. So anyways, I'm waffling too much, right? But at the end of the day, not enough people are paying attention to all this, right? It's clear as day. right? If the Bible's real and all this, I mean, it has to be real. There's no way that somebody wrote this as a fraudulent work, right? And it all just came true, right? There's no way. So from 688 to 1948 is 1260 years exactly. 1948 is one of the biggest events in all Jewish history. It's the rebirth of Israel. Can't deny that. They just had the Holocaust, World War II. They were trying to exterminate the Jews. There was no Israel at the time. It was dominated by the Islamic Empire. Okay, 1948, Israel was reborn. The people of God, Jews, Christians, got to return there to live. It was the start of the ingathering. This is an epically huge event, one of the biggest events in Jewish history. It's akin to like the Exodus. Okay, it's huge, it's epic. All right, and it's precisely 1260 years. And in Daniel chapter 12, this is another one of the pillars they mention in the book. It says that there'd be 1290 years from when the continual sacrifice was taken away until this abomination stands. So if you count back 1290 years from 688 AD, you come to the precise year when Nebuchadnezzar took away the continual sacrifice in 602 BC, 602, 603, whichever one it was. So 1290 years later is exactly 688. So what Daniel said came true over a vast period of time. Okay, and it's absolutely impossible. Don't forget, in Daniel chapter 9, he's detailing when the Messiah would arrive. I mean, I've said this before. If someone's fraudulently writing this book, how could they predict when the Messiah would come accurately? You know what I mean? Most people in Jesus' time didn't even believe he was the Messiah. You know what I mean? His own nation of peoples rejected him. But yet, skeptics would have us believe that the book is fraudulent and that somebody just made this all up. Well, if they made it all up, how in the world, could they actually guess correctly when the Messiah would come? Okay. Um, Most people in Judaism wanted the Messiah to come at that time, all the way up until then, but they didn't know when he would come. With Daniel, we get the first hint mathematically when it might happen. And Daniel said it would be 483 years after the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, both street and wall, the Messiah would be cut off, which most take as meaning died. So this shows you that the Messiah must have arrived at that point, but that the Messiah would die. It also shows you that the Messiah would be a human like us and that he would be capable of dying. So it shows you that a human Messiah would show up on the earth 483 years after the decree. So the decree, historians confirm, the Bible confirms, it's the same event. King Artaxerxes is the one who gave this decree to rebuild Jerusalem, both street and wall. The Bible details in the verses, hey, we're building the street and the wall for Jerusalem. So it's all there. It says Artaxerxes. So history confirms it. And this was 457 BC. No argument there. It's a fixed number. It cannot be altered. Historians even say that. They say no other year is viable. It's 457, and that's what that is what that's the year when it happened. 483 years later is when Jesus died. Okay, and all of these numbers play into other pillars of prophecy from the Bible as well. For example, God says in Isaiah, this is one of my discoveries. In Isaiah, God says to Israel that, how they've, disobeyed and this and that there, and that he's going to give them a double portion of punishment. So considering that a double portion would be a double period of time in which they will be punished, which makes perfect sense, I went and meticulously added up all the years when Israel disobeyed God, which mean after King David and after King Solomon, and literally to the exact single digit, added up all the years, and they totaled to 999 until the year Jesus died, based on the aforementioned maths, right? Which would be 26 AD. That's 483 years after 457 BC. So that's when Artaxerxes gave the decree. That's when Jesus died. And from the final year of Solomon's reign until Jesus' death was 999 years. And it was during this period in which Israel offended God, disobeyed God, and it culminated with the Messiah himself being rejected and being put to death. That was the termination point there. From there, to get their double period of punishment would be at 999 times 2. So I was being super precise. I didn't round anything. That's 1,998 years. When you do the maths, it comes to 2023, 2024. I can't remember which one, but it's all in the book there. Right? So all of this cannot be a coincidence. If you think about it, it all poetically makes perfect symbolical sense. They disobeyed. David and Solomon were good kings. Once Solomon's reign ended, if you read the Bible, almost all of the kings disobeyed God. Almost all of them. It's pretty bad, right? Some of them were pretty good, right? But it was this period of time in which they continually, the people disobeyed God. In the Bible details that. And it does culminate with the death of the Messiah. So, undeniably, this is a period of dark time, 999 years. Before that, under King David, under Solomon, those were the good years. You know what I mean? But this other time is marked by this period of darkness, ending with the death of the Messiah, which is a great tragedy. And then from there starts the period of punishment, double period of punishment, which goes forward to the end of days, according to Daniel, the end of days, according to 6,000 years. You follow me? So that's covering four of the pillars so far. Then another discovery that I made, which I go through in the book, it's another chapter, is in the book of First Enoch. Okay, not the other fraudulent Enoch books, but the book of First Enoch, which is part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is a legitimate book. I have other videos where I show evidence that it must be canon. The Holy Bible actually quotes the book of Enoch in dozens of places. I've got a video about that, reading all the quotes. Is mind blowing. I mean, it's absolutely mind blowing. And there's reference to prophets of old in the books of the prophets, and there's no other prophets besides Enoch before the Tanakh prophets came. Moses wasn't a prophet. There were no prophets besides Enoch. So when the Bible itself is referring to the prophets of old, this could only be Enoch. Enoch was called a prophet who gave prophecy. In the New Testament, he is described as that. So Enoch was a prophet. If he was a prophet and gave prophecy, and that prophecy is quoted from the New Testament, then he obviously did write a book of prophecy, which is canon. In that book of prophecy, which is quoted, is First Enoch. So there's just a few reasons why First Enoch must have been canon. And that book, First Enoch, is quoted dozens of times throughout all various books of the Bible, Old and New Testament, is especially Old Testament. It's mind blowing. Like all the famous books of the Old Testament quote the book of Enoch in the most obscure places too. And there's no way that this would be viable. Like it wouldn't be. This would not be something that you would see from an act of fraud. Like a fraudster is not going to go in and do such obscure little things that nobody else besides me would ever notice or even think to look for or care to look for. But I noticed some things when reading the book of Enoch where he talks about the hills melting like wax. I'm like, oh, that sounds like something from the Bible. That's basically how I got clued into it. So I started thinking of all sorts of biblical buzzwords and terms and phrases and sentences, and I looked them up, and I found them in the book of First Enoch and in this. In the book of First Enoch, found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, is just as old as any other copy of the book of the Tanakh. There is no other copy of the Tanakh books, any book, that is older than the Dead Sea Scrolls. Right, so nobody has any right to say that the book of First Enoch is not and could not have been canon, and that all of this was just an act of fraud. People, if First Enoch wasn't canon, okay, then why is it quoted consistently throughout the whole Tanakh, written by different authors at different times? I mean, the only way that it would be the other way around is if everything's just a big fraudulent work. But if it was all just a big fraudulent work, why would somebody make such obscure little parallels and quotations? Like nobody has been out here teaching, oh, you can find the exact phrases from First Enoch in Psalms and in this book and in that book in the talk. Nobody's been saying that. So if it was such an important work of fraud, such a huge effort, they would have made it known and it would have been talked about and more discussed and debated, but it hasn't been. So this is more just like you're finding traces of actual super credible evidence for things that nobody else has noticed, like finding a gem when you're walking down, a mine shaft, or finding a little nugget of gold out in the middle of the desert. You know what I mean? It's like something like that. If someone's doing a huge work of fraud, they're not going to hide a little rock of gold out in the desert. They're going to do something obvious where it can deceive people. You know what I mean? So anyways, in the book of First Enoch, I only went through all that because a lot of people think the book is fake. But in the book of First Enoch, Enoch gives a very famous prophecy, which is about 70 generations. Most people accept this to be 4,900 years. Anyways, the explanation for my reasoning on that is in the book and everything, but save time. 4,900 years, when you take that measure of time from when Enoch, like in that chapter, I noticed something that nobody else has noticed. I had noticed it my whole life, like 20-something years, and nobody else has talked about it. So I might be the first person to ever find it. It actually says in that chapter that this was 500 years before the flood when this specific message is being given to Noah. So that tells you when this message was being given. Noah is alive. Having the biblical chronology mapped out, like I said in chapter 1 here, we know the periods of time. It's all mapped out there, right? So it's 500 years before the flood. Noah is alive. You can mathematically narrow down to when this is, to the exact year. And it was like 2951 BC. Okay. So from that point there, you count forward the 4,900 years, it leads you to 1948. Okay. At the end of 1948, I think it's 1949. That is mind blowing. So out of the seven pillars, like five are my own unique discovery, but out of the seven pillars, all of these amazing discoveries, it is just, in my opinion, it has to be mathematically impossible for all of these things to connect, right? And to just be mathematical coincidences, right? And just, it's just the odds, I mean, it would just be a huge mathematical, impossibility. So for example, right, out of the seven pillars, each one of the pillars confirms something specific, right? So this shows you the connection, okay, between these things. So if you're talking about how realistic or what are the odds of this just randomly occurring, just being a big coincidence, all these things, right? You have to factor these levels in here, right? So the first pillar, the 6,000 years I talked about, this confirms 2023, right? Because the end of the 6,000 is 2023, 2024. The prophecy of Enoch confirms 1948, which, as I mentioned earlier, is key from the prophecy of Daniel, right? So these are the two dates that will keep repeating. 2023 is confirmed, 1948 is confirmed, right? And keep in mind, 1948 ties into 2023 based on the prophecy of Daniel, which I haven't explained in this video, but I explained in the book. And I've said it a million times before over the years, right? Then the third pillar, which is the prophecy of Isaiah that I briefly mentioned, this confirms 2023, right? So we have two separate prophecies, unrelated, relying on key historical events that can't be duplicated, and they both confirm 2023. That alone is pretty uncanny. And then when you get to the prophecy of Daniel, this was another discovery that I made here, and it's very long-winded. I'm not going to get into it, but this one confirms 1948. This is from the prophecy given to Nebuchadnezzar, ironically. This also confirms 1948. And then, so that's two confirming 2023 so far and two confirming 1948. And then the fifth pillar, this is the prophecy of Daniel, where it mentions the 1290 years. This confirms 688 AD. Okay. And then I have a subchapter in this chapter here on the amazing side connections between the pillars. I'll mention that in a second. That's another mathematical, uncanny mathematical feature of all of this, which supports its authenticity. Then the sixth pillar, the core prophecy of Daniel, right? As I got into detail in this video, the 1,335 years overall, culminating in 2023, 2024. This confirms all the dates aforementioned, 688, 1948, and 2023. So this is where they all tie together. So you can start to see what the connection here is. 2023, 1948 being confirmed by all these prophecies, and 688, and then they all get confirmed together with the mega prophecy of Daniel, right? And in chapter 7, the seventh pillar, this is from the book of Revelation, prophecy of John, 1,260 years, which confirms both 688 and 1948. So we have these seven pillars, right, of prophecy. Each one is a unique prophecy with a different period of time being spoken about, with a different unique number ascribed to it. Okay. And of all these seven, they all come together without conjecture and literally mathematically confirm the same years. Okay? This cannot be a random coincidence of the universe. Especially, like I said, when one of the 7 points, pillars of proof alone is a 6,000 year span, which has been meticulously mapped out in the Bible, confirmed by major historical events, undeniable, and that culminates in the same years. There is no way that this is a coincidence. The magnitude of the impressive magnitude, the sheer magnitude of all of these discoveries and the importance of them, the implications, all wrapped together, the magnitude of that all together, I think proves the Bible. It has to. There's just no way that this is a work of fraud. When all of this stuff, remember, all of this stuff has already come to pass. Like the 6,000 years being this year, that's come to pass, right? It's been 6,000 years. We just have to wait and see if the end comes or not, right? That's come to pass. I mean, each one of these things are based on events that have already taken place. Like you can't say, well, we're waiting for things to happen. The only thing we're waiting for is for the end to come. Every single other thing that was foretold by Daniel and in the other prophecies have all come to pass. That's the key thing. Whoever wrote Daniel, it was written at the Dead Sea Scroll time, at the same age of the other Dead Sea Scrolls that were found that time. Okay, so a couple hundred years BC. Somebody in that time period, most recently at 100 and something BC, at most recent, somebody wrote legitimate, bona fide prophecy that would all come true, spanning chapters of their book, and it would all come true. It would be preserved for thousands of years. People would believe it across the world, billions of people for thousands of years, and all the events will come true. So but to us now, all of those important events are past, right? That's how, for me, this alone, the magnitude of all of this proves the Bible for me. Like, it has to be real, okay? Even if I have some issues with other things like animal sacrifice, you can't deny. Like Stephen Hawking, what would he say to all this? There's no way that Stephen Hawking could read my book. I know he's gone now, right? But there's no way that Stephen Hawking or any other brilliant mind could read this book here, see the evidence, weigh out the implications, like mathematical, what are the odds mathematically of this randomly occurring and just connecting all these things with the historical. The odds of that would just be mind-blowing. It's impossible. I would not believe for a second if anybody came out there saying that there is a chance that it could randomly occur, because there is no way. Nothing else like it has occurred. In no other religions have detailed prophecies that have all come true like this. None of them have. None. Okay? This prophecy from Daniel alone covers chapters, is the longest prophecy in the Bible, I'm pretty sure, offhand. It's got to be. Okay? It's huge. No other religion has this. Okay? So you can't say that if you're saying that the odds of it would be that it could occur, and that I'm wrong for saying that, oh, it's impossible, it must be divine. If you're saying that, no, you think it could naturally just randomly occur, then if it's so possible that it could naturally randomly occur, given all the thousands of years we've had on this earth in biblical times, has anybody else in thousands of years ever noticed this or brought all this information up and made all these connections and pointed them out? No. Okay. I know some of the events you had to wait for like 1948 for confirmation, but you didn't need to wait till 1948 to confirm who the final beast kingdom was and all. So, you had thousands of years for somebody else to notice, hey, this here, but nobody else noticed it. It hasn't occurred anywhere else in any other religion. That's what I meant to say, actually. It hasn't occurred anywhere else out there. So no other religion on the earth had some big, great, massive prophecy, super detailed, and other prophecies, and they all back up and connect each other. No, you haven't seen it anywhere else on the earth, right? So the only time it would have existed would be with this compilation, okay? That is of findings, right? This is the only time that it has happened on this earth in any religion or written system or anything. This is the only time it's happened. So you can't tell me, oh, the odds are that it could randomly occur, because this would be the one and only time that it did occur. And if something's only occurred once like that, only a fool would say that, oh, it must be random. This is the first and only time it's occurred, but I must know everything and decree that it was random, right? If we've had thousands of years, trillions, pentillions of possibilities in moments when it could have occurred and it never occurred, but we got one where it did occur. And I don't think anybody could come out and say, well, this is the one single time where you had the uber coincidence that occurred. You know what I mean? Come on. And it's with a religion that half the world follows, basically, right? Half the world follows Jesus. About 1/3 of the planet is a Christian. You know what I mean? So you factor all these things in together, and with like the miraculous events that took place at Jesus's death that were testified by, about half a dozen ancient writers or more, separate ancient writers from different nations, even opponents of Christianity, who testified to the miracles that he did, to the miracles that Christians did, to the miracles that occurred at his crucifixion. When you combine all this together, he wasn't just some guy who died, and the Bible can't be a bunch of baloney. There's absolutely no way, right? There's absolutely no way. I mean, who do you see today name me somebody, that's what I was trying to get at, that has gone out there and given prophecy? Even all the Christians, all the wannabe Christians spouting prophecy, none of their stuff comes true because it's all baloney. Okay, you got everybody out there on YouTube. I am giving a prophecy for 2023, and none of the stuff ever comes true. It's all hogwash. Nobody out there is giving prophecy, because prophecy is like a miraculous divine thing. It has to come from God. You don't get to say the prophecy. God gives it to you and you say it. Okay, so we do and Judaism will tell you the prophets stopped with Malachi. There were no prophets after Malachi. So even biblically, the prophets were divinely appointed and in their time, in ancient times, and there haven't been prophets since then. Someone could give a prophetic word, don't get me wrong, right? But in terms of prophecy, like divinely appointed, scripturally upheld, upheld as scripture, prophecy, not just what some guy prophesied, even if it comes true, that could happen, but scriptural prophecy, like bona fide canon scriptural prophecy, we've already got it. It was sealed off at the end of Malachi, and all those prophecies, Old Testament wise, Tanakh wise, all that stuff. That's what I'm saying. You can't. I forgot where I was going with this, but you can't make this stuff up. Okay, it's got to be legitimate and it's got to be real. When I was growing up, there was like no archaeology to confirm Israel's existence. Even when I was like 18 years old, there was very little stuff. They started to find things. Now archaeologists and historians agree that Jesus really existed, that ancient Israel actually existed. Most Christians would be shocked to know that for decades there was no actual historical archaeological proof that Israel really ever existed. Like there was nothing, and it was pretty shameful. But they've actually found stuff now, a lot of stuff, right? So it's pretty much confirmed. Historians and archaeologists agree that Jesus had to be real. Ancient Israel was real. Solomon, David, all of them, the story was real. And when you look at it, the Bible is really one of the most ancient historical record books on the planet. Like, it details a lot of information, which can be pretty much backed up through the bit we have from archaeology. So it's not all just wild lies. You know what I mean? And even the far-fetched things that they might have claimed, like giants. I believe in giants, but like what some might say would be far-fetched would be giants. And because the Bible doesn't really talk about it, doesn't mention dragons really at all. Leviathan's just a large fish, according to Judaism. So there's no talk about paranormal weird creatures like every other religion has. Now, the Bible is pretty cut and clear, and the only like monstery thing they had were giants, which are just tall people. I mean, how it's not impossible, you know what I mean? And yet it wasn't exclusive to ancient Judaism, because the nations in those lands believed in giants too. And there are gigantic constructions in those lands which would lend credence to giants having built them. It's not like it's a completely wild, unfounded claim, like saying, "Oh, werewolves used to rule the land," or flying space monkeys. You know what I mean? So there is reason to believe, and like I said as well, Jesus had to be the real deal, because if he wasn't, nobody would be here believing him 2,000 years later. And when you combine all these things, the Bible's got to be the real deal. Jesus has to be the real deal. These prophecies are the real deal. All this is going to come to pass, and 2024 is the final remaining year for it to happen in. Okay, I'm not fussing over what week, month, day, and this and that there. Maybe it's going to be a little bit after 2024. I'm not fussed. I go through my book how it may happen in the year subsequent to that, in a rare case. But 2024, by all our reasoning, according to the Bible, it should happen. So we got this much evidence and like the odds working in favor for the authenticity of this, saying that it should happen in 2020. Well, 2023, it ain't going to happen. Like I said, unless it's tonight or tomorrow. So it's going to happen in 2024. That was the only other option out of the 2 years. So it's going to happen in 2024. We need to prepare for that. We need to reform now. Jesus gave his edicts to the 7 churches. Those were not, even though they're named after the ancient day churches of the time, they were not representing the 7 churches of the end. They were actually representing the 7 end days churches. When Jesus gave the edict and warning to each one of the 7, he specifically says to some of them that if you don't reform, I will come against you with the sword of my mouth. And in multiple references, he's talking about when he arrives, he will punish them. So it's talking about final day assemblies, the final day body of Christianity divided up arbitrarily or whatever into 7 bodies. Okay. And the only reason it would be these divisions, continents, I highly doubt. Probably theology. That makes the most logical sense. So not geography, but theology. So it'd be 7 theological main branches or divisions of Christianity. This makes the most sense because he gives different warnings and punishments to each one. So they're obviously believing and doing different things. But the important thing is that only one of the 7 churches got it right. Okay, I'm not here to argue about theology, but only one got it right. Only one didn't get threatened. That was the Church of the Assembly of Philadelphia, and only to them was a reference to being raptured and translated and spared from the wraths and tribulations mentioned, right? To all the other of the seven was threats and warnings. If you don't reform, a command to reform was given to each, and a threat: if you don't reform, I will punish you, whatever it might be, destroy you, punish you, you know what I mean, lash out at you when I arrive. So it's quite clear. So my point with all this rhetoric is that we are literally instructed by Jesus in reference to the end days and in reference to wherever you are in Christianity, whatever belief division you are in Christianity. All of us have been commanded by Jesus to reform. Okay. Now think about this too. If he commanded all the other assemblies to reform, but one of them he didn't command to reform, it's probably fair to say that that's the assembly that actually preached Reformation. Okay. Now, none of the denominations of Christianity today really preach Reformation as a theological doctrine. They might preach indirect Reformation, where they might teach where you should be a good person and stop doing bad things, but nobody teaches it as a doctrine. I tried to find a church and a denomination to join. They don't exist. And it's very sad, but it's commanded in the Bible. There's literally a verse in the New Testament that says God does now command all men everywhere to reform. It's literally commanded by God. In that it says in that verse that the times of ignorance God is now, going to put behind. He does now command all men everywhere to reform. So the time is now to reform. There's 53 mentions to Reformation in the New Testament. And there's also a verse where he literally instructs the disciples to go spread the gospel to the world. In that verse, it says, now go to the world and teach all men to reform. Okay? Reformation is the way. That is what was commanded by Jesus. I go through it in my systematic theology. I have whole chapters on this topic. This is a priceless book. Okay? And that's what people need to be doing. So that is the actual theology. That's the gospel. That's what Jesus said the gospel is defined as, commanding people to reform. It is commanded by God. Another perspective, it is commanded by God. God and Jesus say repeatedly in the New Testament and the Old Testament, you have to keep their commands. Those who enter into the heavens are those keeping the commands of God and having the faith of Jesus. That's what Jesus tells us in Revelations. So one of the commands of God is to reform. Nobody out there teaches to reform. Nobody out there, some people are, but generally speaking, nobody out there is reforming because they're not taught and they don't know that they need to. The Bible actually teaches you to reform. Old Testament and New Testament teach Reformation as the law of God. That's what you got to do. Okay. Now, if one of the churches gets it right, and that's the one church that wasn't threatened and said that you must reform, obviously they're a church that teaches and practices Reformation. So it's fair to say that the Philadelphia Assembly is probably, I'm not saying it definitely is, but it's probably a church or branch, even if it doesn't have actual churches, if it's just an invisible branch of believers of Christ who believe that you must reform unto God. And those will be the true ones who'll be spared from the tribulations and wrath. My point is that everybody has to reform. Okay, and if you want to be part of that assembly that gets taken like that, then you got to reform. Okay, because if you don't reform, you're going to be in one of the other assemblies where God says, hey, you should have reformed. I told you to do it and you didn't do it. Now I'm going to come and spank you with the sword coming out of my mouth and burn you with fire. So you can take your pick, right? Excuse me, let me check my time. Oh, 1 hour, good Lord. Yes, let me end this video. Anyways, take care, folks. Let's hope and pray that it does happen. I honestly would be very surprised if it does not happen in 2024. But like I go through my book, there's one chapter. I'll skip reading the other things I said I was going to read, but I have one subchapter in this book where I detail what would happen, what could we expect if it doesn't occur in 2024. Okay, there's 3 other possibilities. It goes up to like 2028 or 2029. These are slim chance type things. They get a little bit more slim as it goes, but it's possible. And I give the verses and the grounds and the reasoning for it. So it's not that all hope is lost if nothing happens in 2024. And people have to also be aware. I mean, even if it doesn't happen in 2024, it might happen the next week. You know what I mean? So there shouldn't be a point where you just throw up your arms and give up all hope and say, oh, it's all a lie. Like that will never happen. What if we're just a few years off for whatever reason? Like, what if the calendars were altered or something stupid? You know what I mean? I don't think so because all the events and the prophecies match up. But, what if it's something to that type of extent? Or what if God just chooses to extend it a bit? You know what I mean? He could always do that, and we can't say anything. That might be the condition that makes it no one will know the day or hour. Maybe the prescribed year is that, but maybe God be like, oh, I'm just going to add a year on, or I'm going to add 6 months on. He could do that. He might add a few years on, right? You know what I mean? We can't say no. So I don't think there should ever be a point where you just give up hope. We should generally believe that, and sorry, we should generally hope, it is our blessed hope, like the Bible says, to wait for the manifestation of God and the Lord, during our lifetime, i.e., with the end days and all that. However, we should also understand that every human being, when they die, will meet God and Jesus and be judged. And if you're worthy, you'll go on to heaven. So it's all going to happen to us in our life. So does it really matter if it's going to happen this year, next year? As long as we're prepared, and being prepared means being reformed, right? So as long as we prepared and we've reformed, no matter when it happens, if it happens at the end of our life, because it never happened in our lifetime, you know what I mean? Or if it does happen in our lifetime, but maybe 50 years from now, or if it does happen in our lifetime in 2024. In either case, if we've prepared and reformed, then we'll be ready for all scenarios. And that's the only solution in all of this, and that's what everybody has to do. And what I want to do for I never make New Year's resolutions, and this has nothing to do with the New Year's resolution. For me, it's just got to be, I've been all about warning people about 2023 and 2024 since 2018, 2016, I think it was, right? So I've been warning people for years. 2023 has now come to pass, and we're left with this final year to go by. In 2024, since it's the final year, it's shameful enough that I haven't fully reformed and become a worthy Christian. I got to become a worthy person, as is everybody else out there. We all got to do it. We got to pull up our bootstraps, as they say, and we got to get it right. And we got to start reforming and living on earth as it is in heaven now. Because if we don't do that, and Jesus comes back, we're going to get turned away. We're going to get denied. He's going to say, you're the ones who disobeyed. You broke the commands. Just like he warns in Matthew and all the other places, be gone from me, you workers of unlawlessness, right? You workers of iniquity, all you committing a lie and fornication and this and that, they're being kept out of the heavens, right? So I don't commit most of those things, don't get me wrong, but I'm still not worthy, right? And I think most people are not worthy. And I think that most people need to reform. I think pretty much everybody needs to reform. So take my advice. 2024 is coming. It might happen on the first day of 2024. We don't know. It could happen on the final day of 2024. It might happen around the time 1948 rebirth of Israel, which would have been, I think, like the third month, so maybe March or something like that. But it could happen at any point in 2024. And maybe it may not even happen in 2024. But you know what we have to do? We have to get ready like it will happen in 2024. Because based on all the evidence, like I detail in my book, it needs to, it's going to happen. Like it, everything else is lined up. Is God, this is just the final domino out of like a lineup of dominoes. All the other things came to be and were fulfilled in their time. This is just the last little domino waiting to tick over. The last little 75-year period, think that's it. Everything else has been fulfilled. By all rightful thinking and reasoning, we should expect this next one. That's a good way to put it. I've said this once before. It's like if you had 10 dominoes, you knock over the first domino, and each of the dominoes is like a prophecy, right? And if it doesn't come true, the domino stays standing up. If it falls over, it means the prophecy's come true and it's done its job, right? So you have 10 dominoes standing up. You knock over the first domino, that first prophecy, the second, the third, the fourth prophecy, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth. All those prophecies come true in their times. So all those dominoes, dink, 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 dink. What do you think's going to happen to the last domino? If all the other dominoes, if all those other events have come to pass, what do you think's going to happen with the last one? It's going to follow suit. That's how science works. If something happens 9 times in a row, what do you think's going to happen on the 10th time? The same thing again, right? So if we have all these fulfillments, all those 9 times, the last one's going to happen too. So using all fair logical reasoning, we should, by that right, be expecting it to happen and acting like we expect it to happen in 2024. And I think it would be foolish and ignorant, for example, of me, especially me being, the one spouting all this for like 7 years. It'd be an absolute foolishness for me to not reform and get ready, because I'll tell you what, if I am writing this, what's that noise? Is that the TV? Sounds like a dog whining. Might be the TV. Anyways, the dog's right next to me. He's not making any noise. Um, I would be an utter fool if I didn't prepare. Like, what would God say to me? Like, oh, blah 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 blah. You of all people should have known, and you still were too lazy and selfish to reform, or too sinful, or too addicted to whatever sins, and you couldn't reform and get it together. I'd probably boil in hell for that. So I got to reform. Everybody's got to reform, right? This is the time. So it's not about making a cheesy New Year's resolution. It's bigger than that. 2024 is a big number for me. When 2023 came around, I got high adrenaline, anticipating it to happen anytime. Now we're near the end of 2023. We're in that final of those 2 years for that period. It's the same thing again. It could very, very well happen. But I'll tell you what, at the start of 2023, we did not have the Israel Hamas war. Okay, we didn't have those terror attacks. I just learned the other day how bad the things were that they did to the women. It's unspeakable. It's worse than any horror movie I've ever seen or heard of or read about. No exaggeration. It is sadistic, satanic, evil, barbaric torture that they did to these women. It's unspeakable. It's like from the movie Hellraiser. That's all I could say. It's unspeakable, unspeakable horrors. And that lines up with the Gog Magog prophecy and the Zechariah prophecy saying that these type of things would happen right before the arrival of Messiah and God. So we have all biblical reasoning to expect it to happen. And, I'm a sinner. I'm not worthy. I don't want to go down as being unworthy. I got to reform. So, join suit, follow suit and reform. Do it for the right reasons. You got to reform now. Don't say I didn't warn you. You keep your chin up for all of 2024. And even if it doesn't happen, like I said, that's not a reason to give up hope at all whatsoever. Don't dare do that, because what if it's the next week? What if it's the next month? And at the end of the day, even if it doesn't happen in your lifetime, who cares? Because when you die, it'll happen anyways, right? So never give up hope. It is our blessed hope. And we have more reason now. This is another important thing to say. I just got inspired with this. We who are alive today, right now, have more reason than anybody else who ever existed in all history to believe that the end is upon us. Everybody else before expected it to happen and wanted it to happen, or was saying it would happen in their lifetime, where a lot of people didn't know when it would even happen. But of all the people that have ever existed over thousands and thousands of years, the people who have come closest to it actually happening are us right now. So we're in a better position for all this to actually come to pass than anybody over the last 6,000 years. Okay, that needs to be understood too, because people have this foggy cloud hanging in their head as Christians, thinking, oh, all these failed, oh, it's going to happen now type things, and it never does, and they have this over their head. Well, the single sole reason for that may be the 6,000 years need to come to an end. We're in 2023, 2024 is the 6,000th year. You got to wait out 2024 before you jump to any other further conclusions. You know what I mean? That will be the end of the 6,000 years. That would be a pretty darn good reason why nothing happened before then and until then. You follow me? So, and when you have Jesus's death being pinpointed by Daniel chapter 9, when it would occur, when you have those other prophecies that detail from Jesus' death until 2023, like the Isaiah prophecy, there's no wiggle room. Like everything is being blocked in and accounted for, like one block next to each other. There's no wiggle room. It's just like block, block, block. It's all accounted for, right? From Artaxerxes' decree to Jesus' death, from Jesus' death to the return of Jesus, right? All that's mapped out. So there's no denying it, man. Everybody's got to get ready. You factor in my prophetic dream. Everybody else is getting prophetic dreams. That's something God said would happen in Joel's prophecy, which is repeated in the New Testament. God said he would give people, young and old, dreams and visions. That has been increasing. I've been watching for stuff like that on YouTube since I first joined YouTube, like 7 years ago in 2016. And I've been watching it ever since then. And I can tell you now, because I've always looked for prophecies, like dreams and this and that there, people are getting them on a huge rise now. Like it was very rare back in the day to find stuff like that, and it's just risen. And the things that people are experiencing and seeing, not all of it might be credible, but a lot of it is very similar. Okay, and this could just very well be the great testimony. And I've said before as well, Joel's prophecy, which paralleled in the New Testament, says that we would see pillars of smoke in the skies going red and the stars falling before the Messiah comes. Even Jesus repeated these warnings about the stars falling and all this. Now, we did see red auras in the sky in whatever year it was, 2021, 22, 23, it actually occurred in different parts of the world, and they were blood red. It looked like the sky had blood. Okay, legit. I've seen the photos. You can look them up. It's a very, very rare phenomenon that takes place. It requires very specific conditions. Okay, and I think it occurred. The last time it occurred was like 65 years ago. Okay, so those things did occur in the final period of 3.5 years. The years in which would be the final 3.5, when the two witnesses are in God are plaguing the earth and all that type of thing, right? So, and falling stars, shooting stars, bolides, meteors, and all that are profoundly increasing as well. If you compare them to years past, I did this, and you look at the charts, the number of them are increasing dramatically. Okay, that's also undeniable. And I have an asteroid tracker program, and I just got another alert. I mean, 2023, if you look at the chart, like above the Earth, all the asteroids and objects going by, it's like a swarm of mosquitoes going past the Earth at times. In the years after 2023 and 2024, it dies off, right? So there's even more reason to believe that these are the time periods, because that would be all the falling rocks, meteors, and stars, not actual stars, but all the falling rocks that God says would happen, the hail, the great hail and fire that would come down from the heavens. The meteors fall down to the earth, and the fireballs, they leave a pillar and a trail of smoke and a vapor, a pillar of vapor. So all the warnings, they're coming true, right? They're coming true. Like I said before, UFOs started showing up in 1948, the same year as rebirth to Israel, primarily in 1948. They did come down a little bit before that. But they're around the world watching us now, and I don't think they're all bad. I think there's good ones as well. And what we're seeing at the end of the day is that's what the Bible always told us: there's good angels, there's bad angels, there's, the good watchers and the bad watchers. The fallen ones are bound to the earth as per Revelation 12 and can't leave the earth. So Satan's minions are from outer space, but they're bound here. The good angels are doing what they're always prescribed by God to do, which is watch and govern over us in whatever prescribed way. And what do we see taking place? Like, not nitpicking who is good and who's bad, because none of us know, right? But all we can tell visually, tangibly, is that there's tons of UFOs, thousands at any given moment on the earth, flying around, being seen by tons of people around the world, and nowadays are being videotaped like basically every day. It's undeniable, and they are definitely watching us. And what the heck is going on? Whether they're good or bad, it definitely means that something is going to happen. And they started to show up after 1948, and it's only been on the increase ever since then. That follows the same general pattern as everything else. Okay? And it all points towards the credibility of the end days occurring in this time. So if Daniel's prophecy didn't say those things, if his prophecy didn't mention the 1335, I probably wouldn't be here saying this, except for maybe the 6,000 years. That'd be pretty that would be stretching it compared to the amount of evidence I got here now, right? But if you just took away that one pillar of proof, or just that one number, 1335, I may not be here saying all this. But because that penultimate prophecy and all the others combined together, all the evidence together, and the apocalyptic noises everybody hears around the world in recent years, you combine all this hardcore evidence together, I think we have more than enough reason to believe, or at least very seriously consider, that the end will be upon us soon. And whether the earth is literally destroyed or not, or just reshaped, whatever, right? We don't need to fuss about it, because, I mean, one might say it's more realistic that the whole planet doesn't get destroyed and remade. Some might say that's more fantastic. Well, the Bible doesn't really specify, I don't think, too greatly, that it's in places it talks about like it'll not be destroyed and always be here and still stay populated. In other places it talks about it being whatever it is, reshaped or replenished, right, or allowed to rest. So I mean, there's different. In other places it talks about the heavens and the earth will be dissolved by fires. We have all these different things, but at the end of the day, it's entirely possible the earth will stay standing, and it just might be that it gets barraged by meteors, and fire from the heavens, and gets barraged by meteors, like has happened on Earth countless times. I mean, look at how many craters are on the moon. It's undeniable. This type of thing happens, and if we had celestial watchers, heavenly and divinely appointed watchers, angels, messengers, to come from God to warn us thousands of years ago, to say, hey, at the end of days, Prophet Daniel, you're going to see these things happen. And telling John as well 2,000 years ago, at the end of days, you're going to see these things happen, and the rocks falling and all this, into Isaiah and all the other prophets that were told about this fiery destruction of rocks that will come down at the end of days. It could have been the messengers being told by God, hey, look, the world is going to be pummeled by a bunch of asteroids in around the year 2024, right? Go tell the righteous ones amidst the humans, how they can escape this time. Now, God might utilize that period of meteorite destruction on the earth for a judgment day. I mean, if you are God and you're trying to plan scheduling and you think, okay, I could ransack the earth, you know what I mean, do a judgment day, destroy this and that there, and then, oh, well, 500 years later, meteorites are going to destroy the earth. I mean, God might actually be planning things and scheduling things based around these great cosmic cycles, right? It would take less effort to interfere with the great cosmic cycle and all these other things going on than to just position when things will be planted. Like, so if you know that the earth is going to be barraged by meteors in 2024 AD, then God might say, okay, well, if I want the humans to be here for 6,000 years, then I'm going to have to calculate 6,000 years forward from that. Okay, that's 3197 or whatever it is. And that's when I'm going to go and, well, 130 years before that, I'm going to plant Adam on the earth, right? I know that Adam at 130 years old is going to give birth to Seth, and then 6,000 years from that, boom, that's the end. That's when all the meteors are coming down, and God's just scheduling things. You know what I mean? That way, He doesn't have to do all this fantastic manipulating the universe. The universe is just doing its thing. God's just utilizing the time periods because He knows all and knows what will happen. I'm sure you could just be an advanced alien arguably, and be able to calculate when meteors are going to. I'm pretty sure NASA already can calculate when meteors are going to hit the Earth. So you don't necessarily have to be an omnipotent being to know when it might happen. So I'm just laying the grounds for a more realistic thing because a lot of people view the Bible as being too fantastic and far fetched, but the book of Revelations doesn't really contain anything fantastic. It just talks about a meteorite type destruction of the earth at this time period. The only real fantastic things are when fallen angels and these monster creature things are released. Now, the monster creature things are often said to just be symbolic, so they may just be symbolizing a standard type army or whatever. But the fallen angels, according to the Bible in Revelations 12, are just extraterrestrials. We know extraterrestrials are real. So it's just entirely possible that these are a few extraterrestrials that will be released. I mean, what's unrealistic about that? I mean, we've got UFOs flying around. They're not being flown by raccoons. You know what I mean? They're definitely being flown by aliens. So it's not far fetched to say that there's a handful of aliens or whatever, or 200 maybe, imprisoned within the earth and that they'll be released. And it's not far fetched to say that there might be some creatures down there that look a little bit different. That's the most far fetched thing. It also said the river Euphrates would be dried up, but hey, that's already happening now because of that damming stuff that's going on. So Euphrates River is drying up. I mean, aside from that, there's nothing fantastic or supernatural that's happening. Everything else is rocks falling down, hitting the earth. That's about it. And the rapture is the most extreme thing, but the rapture is basically like a tractor beam. People get taken up into the air. You mean you get lifted up into the air to go into the clouds, be with the Lord forever, like it says. You get taken up, taken off to a new earth, like it says. You have mansions in the heavens. You go join your celestial family in the heavens. You have citizenship in the heavens, like God said. So we're going to be taken to another world. This is putting everything into a very down to earth, real context here. It's not this foofy land of Narnia, spiritual angels, little cupids flying around, arriving on clouds, plucking harps, and flying on horses, and all this foofy medieval stuff. You know what I mean? It's something very real, down to earth stuff that we see nowadays, that we think about nowadays. That's what it's going to be. The earth is going to be struck by an onslaught of meteors. Okay, God's not going to magically send them here. He doesn't need to. Stuff like that happens anyways, and there's tons of them flying around the earth right now. We're going through a torrid swarm. So, and science also recently learned about meteors and such that are hidden behind the sun and can't be seen until the last disastrous second. You could have one of those at any given moment, and NASA at their best will never be able to predict it. So it's entirely. I mean, the other day using my asteroid tracker program, um, meteor or whatever it was, about 160 feet across, and they typically go at about 26 miles a second. That's how fast they're going. It's incredibly quick. It'd be as strong as probably about 100 Hiroshima bombs, or whatever you pronounce it. And it I don't know the exact number, right? Some scientists be like, oh, that's not the right number, right? It'd be like a bunch of nuclear bombs going off. It flew within 1.4 lunar distances. That's very, very close. There's been a lot of space rocks coming very, very close to there, some within lunar distance. It's between the Earth and the Moon. And while none of these are massive and they wouldn't be world destroyers, it just takes enough of them. right? And it says in Revelation that the hail will be of a talent weight. And if I'm not mistaken, I think a talent is 75 pounds, right? So that's not abnormally large. A 75-pound rock is kind of big, but it's not like, that's like the size of um, a chair. I don't know, it's smaller than a chair. 75 pounds of rock, and meteors are usually made of metal, so they're pretty heavy. It might be like a large basketball, you know what I mean, or like a watermelon, and that's that. What's far fetched about that? It's not talking. The Bible doesn't say there's going to be giant rocks the size of continents coming down hitting the earth. Is this we're going to be barraged with hail up to 75 pounds, if I'm reading it correctly? That's entirely possible. Look at the Chelyabinsk, whatever you call it, blast in Russia, like 10, 15, whatever it was, years ago. That thing came out of nowhere. NASA and all them didn't know it was coming. Came out of nowhere. It was as strong as nuclear bombs are. And when it hit, way miles away, it shattered windows for like miles around, deafened people, ruptured people's eardrums, sent like 1,000 people to the hospital, and it didn't even hit a city. You know what I mean? If you had a bunch of those hitting the earth, that would be the end of days, just like people picture. And that's a 100% realistic scenario. Like I said, look at the moon. This isn't science fiction. It's what has happened on this earth and will always continue to happen. That's what happens in space. Okay? So it's not far fetched. I think more people would have come to Jesus in our modern times if they had thought about things in a more realistic light like this. Like, I don't believe that Jesus is tangibly appearing on an actual flying horse. Maybe he will. Maybe he, for the heck of it, said, I want to create a Pegasus because they look cool in my mind. I don't know. Maybe he's going to be flying in a chariot or spaceship that looks like a giant horse, or that some ancient person thought resembled a horse when they saw it. I don't know. Do I really care? I don't care how he appears. But I highly doubt that Jesus will be appearing on fluffy clouds, and I highly doubt, sorry, that he will be coming on a flying horse. Might look kind of cool if it's like a Pegasus, but nonetheless, I kind of doubt it. It does say in the Old Testament that God has chariots, and he has fleets of chariots. What are chariots? They are vehicles. So we're not going to see people flying and walking on clouds like Family Circus. That's not going to happen. You're going to have chariots, vehicles arriving, right? And even though Jesus might be able to fly through space to get here, I'm pretty sure Jesus would rather sit down on a nice, fancy, lazy boy recliner as they fly through space, gathering their legions from the cosmos, coming to the earth so they can then get off of the chair. I'm just trying to be funny, right? And then step out and say, hello, Earth. I'm here to destroy everything. No. But anyways, I've yacked long enough. Everybody take care. Uh, what? I don't. I thought you knew by now. I don't respond to comments when I talk because it makes me forget my train of thought. I've always said that since day one to everybody. All my subscribers know that. Um, Sometimes I check the comments at the end, so let's check these real quick. Well, I know there's a lot of people worse than me out there. I haven't done any heinous things really. I've done some bad stuff, but nothing heinous compared to other people. But at the end of the day, that doesn't make it right. But anyways, take care, folks. I don't think any. I think the only eclipses that would really matter would be if an eclipse occurs over Israel, because eclipses are really localized. I didn't know this many years ago, right? But eclipses only happen over a small portion of land, right? So it's irrelevant if an eclipse happens somewhere. It's only relevant if it happens over Israel and primarily over Jerusalem. That's when it would matter. Outside of that, nothing else would be biblically relevant. I also kind of think it's for reasons like that that God chose Israel because He's got to pick something somewhere as like a cornerstone. You know what I mean? Um, where everybody can draw a reference to. Um, it's not like he was worried about the rebirth of Canaan or the rebirth of Australia or the rebirth of China. He was worried about the rebirth of Israel. Israel was spoken about. Israel's like that marker that we look for. You know what I mean? That's what I mean. Like you pick like a benchmark or like an anchor point that would survive all the time, and people could look to for a reference to piece things together. I don't talk about personal issues like that. My private life is my private life. But anyways, as with everybody, so anyways, take care, folks.